What if the greatest danger to humanity has never been weapons, ideologies, or empires, but something far quieter? What if the true force that destroys civilizations, topples leaders, and twists human nature is built into us? A mechanism so simple we barely notice it. We like to believe we are immune to corruption. That corruption lives out there in greedy politicians, tyrants, dictators, and oligarchs. But every piece of history whispers something far more unsettling. That power changes the human mind faster than we can notice the change, and deeper than we ever expected. Today, we're going to ask a question that empires feared, philosophers warned about, and modern societies still refuse to answer honestly. Why does power corrupt? And why does the mechanism behind it feel so uncomfortably familiar, even to us? Because the truth is simple, but it's also terrifying. The first shift. To understand corruption, we must return to one of the oldest laboratories of human power, ancient Mesopotamia. 5,000 years ago, the world's first kings emerged, not as tyrants, but as organizers. They were chosen to regulate irrigation, protect grain, settle disputes. Before the crown existed, the king was simply the most trusted villager. But archaeologists and anthropologists noticed something strange. Across every early civilization, Sumer, Akkad, Egypt, the Indus Valley, leaders followed the same pattern. They began as servants of the people. They gained more responsibility. Responsibility became authority. Authority slowly detached them from ordinary life. And finally, the disconnect turned into a sense of superiority. It happened so reliably that historians joke, if you want to study corruption, simply give someone a title and wait. The Sumerians even had a word for this transformation, Namlugal, the moment a man ceased being a man and became the king. Not metaphorically, socially, psychologically. Power wasn't just something he held, it was something that rewired his identity. And the most alarming discovery of modern cognitive science is this: our brains respond to power the same way today as they did 5,000 years ago. What power does to the mind. Neuroscientists have spent the last 2 decades studying the brain under power. The results are shockingly consistent. Power reduces empathy. When people feel powerful, the brain regions responsible for mirroring others' emotions, the empathetic resonance network, literally quiet down. You see fewer emotional signals. You care less about them. You feel less impact from them. Second, power increases impulsivity. The prefrontal cortex, the region that handles restraint, long-term planning, and consequences, becomes less active. You act faster with less caution, because your mind expects fewer constraints and fewer risks. Third, power creates a moral halo. When someone rises in status, their brain recalibrates their self-image. I succeeded, therefore I must deserve success. And from that comes the toxic mutation of morality. If I deserve success, then whatever I do to maintain it must also be justified. This is the corruptive cycle. Loss of empathy. Others feel less real. Loss of restraint. Rules feel less relevant. Exaggerated self-importance. Your actions feel more justified. This is why philosophers across cultures, Plato in Greece, Confucius in China, the Stoics in Rome, all arrived independently at the same warning. Power corrupts not because power is evil, but because power makes you forget you're human. The empire pattern. Now look at history through this lens. Rome didn't fall because of one bad emperor, but because a system trained men to believe they were gods. The Qin dynasty in China unified a continent, then collapsed under the weight of its own absolute authority. The Ottomans declined as sultans became isolated within palace walls, hearing only the voices that agreed with them. European colonial empires overstretched because the people in charge believed they had a moral destiny to expand endlessly. Every empire tells the same story. When leaders stop listening to reality, reality eventually forces them to listen. When power centralizes, corruption is not an accident. It is a mathematical certainty. You can predict it like gravity, not because leaders are monsters, but because humans are simply not built to handle unchecked power. No one is, not even us. The simple mechanism. So what is the mechanism? What is the core flaw that always returns? It comes down to one sentence. Power corrupts because power removes consequences. And humans only stay moral when consequences remain visible. Think about it. When you are anonymous on the internet, you behave differently. When you are in a group, responsibility spreads and distorts. When you gain status at work, fewer people contradict you. Corruption begins the moment your actions no longer feel connected to their outcomes. History shows it again and again. Pharaohs who thought the Nile would obey them, emperors who thought grain revolts were beneath them, kings who thought armies would always be loyal, CEOs who thought markets would tolerate anything, politicians who thought public trust was infinite. When accountability disappears, the mind drifts into delusion. Not because humans are evil, but because humans are fragile. Power corrupts for the same reason alcohol impairs judgment. It loosens inhibitions, amplifies emotion, and disconnects action from consequence. The mechanism is simple, but the impact is civilization shaping. The modern parallel. We often think corruption belongs to ancient kings or modern dictators, but the mechanism is alive everywhere today. It appears in social media, influencers with millions of followers, in tech, founders whose apps shape society more than governments, in corporations whose decisions affect entire nations, in political movements that rise faster than their leaders can psychologically handle. And it appears in individuals too, in small personal forms. When we ignore people who can't benefit us, when we bend rules because we know no one will notice, when we feel superior because of money, status, or intelligence, when we stop listening to criticism, when we surround ourselves with people who validate us instead of challenge us. Corruption begins long before anyone commits a crime. It begins in the mind. In the moment we say, I can get away with this, or worse, I deserve this, or worst of all, there's no one who can stop me. That is the seed from which empires rot. The counterforce civilizations used. If the mechanism of corruption is simple, the remedy is simple too, but very hard to practice. Across cultures, wise societies created systems not to stop power, but to interrupt its corrosive effects. The Romans had the concept of cursus honorum, a step-by-step path where no one could jump straight to the top, a built-in humility mechanism. The ancient Greeks rotated political roles, so no citizen held too much authority for too long. Chinese dynasties used examination systems to filter officials through merit, not family privilege. The Iroquois Confederacy gave multiple councils veto power over each other. Even medieval monasteries required leaders to perform mundane tasks, to remind them they were not above ordinary life. All of these systems have one common theme: power must be balanced by perspective, or it begins to decay into corruption. The greatest leaders of history, Marcus Aurelius, Ashoka, Washington, Mandela, did not avoid corruption by strength, but by awareness, by surrounding themselves with people who could disagree, by grounding themselves in something larger than ego. Which brings us to the question we have avoided long enough. Why does power corrupt us so predictably? And what does that say about our nature? Is corruption a flaw? Or is it simply what happens when human psychology meets more power than it can bear? And if the mechanism is inside all of us, not just kings and emperors, what does that mean for the world we're building today? Because our era may be the first in history where ordinary people can wield extraordinary influence. One viral post, one digital movement, one financial decision, one technological breakthrough. Power is no longer reserved for emperors. It is distributed across millions of individuals who never received the training, grounding, or perspective that kept ancient leaders in check. So the question we must finally confront is this: if power corrupts because consequences fade, how do we keep consequences visible in a world designed to hide them? Maybe the real message of history is not that humans are corrupted by power, but that humans are shaped by whatever environment they inhabit. If power isolates us, we become less empathetic. If power shields us from consequences, we become less moral. If power inflates the ego, we become less grounded. But the opposite is also true. When we stay connected to ordinary life, empathy returns. When we practice humility, restraint grows. When we embrace accountability, integrity strengthens. When we invite honest feedback, perspective deepens. The mechanism of corruption may be simple, but the mechanism of wisdom is simple too. History teaches one final lesson. We cannot trust ourselves to stay good under power, but we can build habits, systems, and communities that keep us human. Because the fate of every empire and every leader rests on one timeless truth. Power will always test us, but wisdom is learning to see the test before we fail it. And if we understand how corruption truly works, perhaps we can finally break the pattern that toppled empires, destroyed leaders, and shaped every rise and fall in human history. Join us on a journey through the ages, where every question becomes an opportunity to discover. Subscribe Timeless Questions channel now and start exploring life's greatest questions with us.